Welcome to the Biohackers Podcast. My name is Teemu Arina. Today's guest is Dr. Steven Schwartz from Bioharmonic Technologies. He is a regenerative medicine expert. He has written a book called Primal Resonance, and for the last 20 years, he has dedicated his life to helping humanity to reverse the effects of inflammation, chronic illness, allergies, and emotional imbalances. So there's a psychological component because we are not just physical, but we are basically spiritual beings living in physical bodies, and the connection between all of these are of essence when it comes to longevity and health. So he's the founder and president of Bioharmonic Technologies, and he has developed vibrational sound therapy technologies, and he's specialized on therapeutic music, and the technology itself is called Vibe. And if you want to experience it at the Biohackers Summit, you can, which is one of the world's top conferences on optimal human health and well-being, and I was privileged to have him in Amsterdam. It was absolutely amazing event, and we have our 10th anniversary now in July 2nd and 3rd. At biohackersummit.com you can find more information. But without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Teemu. I'm excited to be on this podcast with you. I've seen so many other amazing people on your podcast, which I've watched, so I'm excited to share with you and your community.
Yeah. So explain us, what is regenerative medicine?
So there's two cards. You're either degenerating or regenerating. And it's an interesting concept because really from the moment the sperm fertilizes the egg, you really begin to proliferate cells. But then almost immediately, because of your environment, you also begin to degenerate. Because really from the moment you're born, which is kind of amazing, you're ticking away technically at the days before you die, which is a very interesting concept. So the idea is, even though you might be rotating 365 days a year on a daily basis, and you're going through cellular turnover and you're being exposed to degenerative aspects of your environment, how do you put in information to allow your cells to do the opposite, to actually proliferate into a space of optimal well-being? This is actually one of my core statements. I say that we're physical manifestations of our own energetic expressions. So when we're really looking at the origination of, let's just go to what's degeneration versus regeneration, mitosis. That's how our cells replicate. We got to look at that. There's a 7-stage process that goes through with every time your cell replicates. And at the very beginning, there's anaphase. It's where you have the metabolism of the cell is interpreted. And it's interesting about that interpreted because it can be interpreted as a regenerative process, or depending on the environment, it can be interpreted as a degenerative process. And this is where we start seeing things like cancer, which is obviously a degenerative kind of process. Actually, it's kind of like a proliferation of an altered communication state that occurs. And really it originates through these epigenetic processes, our environment, the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the thoughts that we think, everything else that feeds into our environment. And this is actually where my work really focuses at that receptor site, that original receptor site, because what creates biochemistry? And there's something happening at that receptor site. And through my research and what I talk about in my book, Primal Resonance, it's all about the living connective tissue matrix, the microfilaments, microtubules, and intermediate tubules that respond to our environment through vibrational resonance. And so based off of that interaction at the original space interaction of mitosis, the anaphase at that receptor site, is what dictates the metabolism of how our cells are going to either degenerate or regenerate. And now we're showing that as you can put in, because think about it, if you're putting in toxic negative information into the cell, you're getting this degenerative process. So really, as a scientist, I think, well, what if we just put positive information into the cells, into that receptor site? It creates the opposite effect, a regenerative state. And what research shows is that as you're putting in, whether it's going to be, nutrition or water or thoughts or emotions or whatever that stimulus is going to be, that signal is going to be, we now begin to see an interaction directly into the cellular expression. And this is where we even see down into the DNA, they say you could see like an unwinding of the double helix spiral. And they say that that is correlated to regeneration.
Right. I guess this is connected to the idea of anabolism and catabolism. So we live between birth, growth, and death on a cellular level, and also as individuals and as, species even. Hopefully we'll live forever, right? But so far we go through cycles, and our body is recycling damaged cells through autophagy and other mechanisms. And then we have basically the anabolic phase and the catabolic phase. When you're awake, that's more of the catabolic. And then you have the sleep, which is more of an anabolic that builds and grows the body. And funnily enough, if you spend too much in the anabolic state, you risk cancer. And if you live too much in a catabolic state, you get things like muscle loss and all that starvation that goes beyond repair. So can you, dive deeper a little bit into that and how you reflect on these terms that are maybe more familiar to people than mitosis?
Yeah, well, the words really are not what's important. Think about mitosis, it's a fundamental aspect, but really it's about how our cells replicate. We can all think about how that's going to occur. But the main area that I'm focusing on in terms of with the Vibes system is working with sound and vibration and the process of regenerating, of entraining not just the brain, but the entire nervous system. And why is that fundamental from what you just said is we go into this, when we're sleeping, we're regenerating. And when we are awake and active, we're kind of degenerating if we're going to play that tug of war process. However, as you are probably aware, if you're doing EEG studies, there's a lot of people that are awake, but yet their brain waves are showing that they're actually asleep. They have very high delta. They don't really have any beta. And so now people are having processes like cancer developing because they're basically awake, yet they're asleep. And then when they try to go to sleep, they really can't sleep either. So that's a problem. Okay. That's just a problem. So now what research also shows is that if you can put spending simple as 30 minutes in theta, it's equivalent to 8 hours of sleep, the same physiological effects of that. And instead of just entraining the brain, because we know that the power of the brain, but when we're looking at the nervous system, the brain is just one part of the entire collective nervous system. And from an embryological perspective, when we're developing inside of our mother's womb, there's a piece of material called the ectoderm that forms the entire nervous system. And what we could see is instead of just working on binaural beats that's in training with our brain or any kinds of other brainwave states for brain entrainment or hypnosis, we can actually put the body into a full body entrainment state and addressing not just the brain, but the spinal cord and the peripheral nerves, the cranial nerves. Dorsal vagal response is a big thing nowadays, especially in the biohacking space. So really, my principle is we're talking about, I believe that it's more of a systemic process through something called the living connective tissue matrix, which surrounds every tissue system and cell of the body and plugs into the nervous system and is part of the nervous system. Also, I think a major component that people don't realize is that the skin is also forms from this ectodermal tissue and is an extension. People think of the skin as a detox organ, but it's actually the largest neurological organ in the body. So being able to pull all of these resources together and entrain the entire nervous system, we can begin to change biochemistry. Well, let's put it this way. Based off your testing, Teemu, I'm sure people can see are they spending more time in a catabolic space or an anabolic space. So once you can kind of determine where that is, either through assessment testing or even just basic symptoms. Can you not sleep? Do you have fatigue? Do you have restlessness, ADD? Are you hyperactive? These are all different sides. Sluggish digestive processes, muscle pain and soreness, chronic inflammation. These are all signs and symptoms of the body not being able to really function at its most ideal optimal space. So being able to shift the nervous system into a more of a homeostatic or more of a balanced neurological experience.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Heart rate variability testing is quite popular among biohackers, and I've used these continuous HRV monitors, and what I learned is even the same situations, you can have a very different reaction depending on your breathing patterns in those moments and also your thought patterns. And the ideal thing is that you have enough sympathetic stimulation throughout the day and enough parasympathetic rest and recovery throughout the day. But most people go through their day feeling every single minute with some kind of stimulatory activity, checking messages, notes. And it's very, very hard to just be and observe and be present. And in the end, I've had days, I'm basically tracked this. And on similar days, if I really focus on it, I can change the state of my nervous system to a more balanced state without reducing the work without doing anything else differently, but the way how I observe my nervous system input and how I kind of surf on it. And this reminds me of, you mentioned sleep, and I want to bring up a practice that is not discussed a lot, but that's a Zen monk practice, and it's called the sitting practice or the sitter's practice. And this is a very advanced technique. And in this practice, not lying down. So you're basically like sitting, and there's different levels to it. And in the beginning, you can use a backrest, or you can use like some kind of band that like holds you like in a seated position. But the ultimate sophistication is where you are sitting and sleeping basically in a meditative state all the time. And I've seen some old documentaries of these Shaolin monks who, like an older man, he's sleeping on one leg and he mastered not being like fully asleep. And it's crazy how some of these long-term meditators can get away with less sleep. We have all these studies that show how important sleep is, but you can actually practice meditation throughout the day and get that rest. You spoke about theta brainwaves and all that. I believe on a general population level, it's true. We need 7 to 8 hours. If you are more sick, you maybe need more sleep than others, if your body needs recovery. But in the end, you can also probably modulate this through meditation. Can you maybe speak about this a little bit, and how are you inducing those brain states or body states? You spoke also about the skin in a wakeful state.
Yeah. What you just talked about, this is it. These are like the monks, the ninjas, the Jedis, these advanced practices of people that, and what I think is so interesting about the biohacking space is it went from a place of like healthcare and doctors, chiropractors and acupuncturists, to self-care. You're putting this out to, we're exposing these practices to the world. So we think about things like meditation. The people that need to meditate the most are the ones that can't meditate. Hey, I want you to go, Timu, I want you to go sit in the corner and meditate for 8 hours, for 15 minutes. Can you sit still for 5 minutes? Most people, their phones are ringing or whatever. There's all kinds of stuff going on. People can't even sit for 5 minutes. And I think that's a very interesting piece, because as we're opening up this biohacking space for the masses, they all have the capability of having these master-like experiences. But in the earliest stages, they just can't get there. They don't even know how to get there. And it's super frustrating. It's like learning a language or learning to cook or learning to dance, play a guitar. First time you try to do any of those things, you're embarrassed and your body is sore and you just don't do it anymore. So what we've worked with is creating a technology that if you can just lay down and put headphones on, we've built the technology into it. So just breathe and you can meditate. But this is the interesting thing about meditation is, you're sitting there, you have your eyes closed, you're breathing, you're counting down from 10 to 1, or you're doing whatever practices you might be doing to entrain to do some kind of hypnotic practices. And then next thing you know, you count to 10 to 1 at 3 or 8. Your mind goes off, starts thinking about your cat, something like that. When you begin to bring in these principles of entrainment, and entrainment can be like rhythm, it can be beat, it can be tempo. There's a lot of different things that can be brought in rhythmically into your nervous system systemically that pulls your body into entrainment. You can't even not do it. It has to happen. So there's some basics to that concept of full body neurological entrainment, which is a term that I coined. However, on top of that premise, because here's what I know, the most important thing for healing that needs to be established first is your body needs to be able to get into parasympathetic. And this is really what happens if you go into deep delta. Your body is allowed to go into parasympathetic. This is where your biochemistry becomes optimized for healing. And so once you're in that space, what we've created at Bioharmonic Technologies and with our sonic pseudocol programs is I've been able to create ingredients of different mathematical ratios that target the connective tissue. Obviously working with different brainwave states. Sometimes we want to be in beta. Sometimes we want to be in theta. Sometimes we want to be in delta. Sometimes we want to do a sweep. So we pick and choose based off of the physiological effect that we're really going for. Then there's other aspects. Think about like neurolinguistic programming or psychological aspect of your mind. But really, instead of working with, we can do applied neurolinguistic programming technology into rhythmic musical programs embedded. So now we're targeting very specific conditions. I call that sonic sacred geometry that we're using. And then also other frequencies that we've been researching. So there's a layered process along with musical theory that we encompass into these programs that can target inflammation, attention deficit disorder, anxiety, depression, bone and tissue regeneration, visceral healing, emotional balancing, PTSD reversal, a variety of different aspects. And this is what I think is because there's another term I want to share with your community that I feel is really important, the term a delivery system. What's the most effective delivery system to human physiology to create the most profound, immediate change? And, we all know about oral, we think about convection, you have that infrared supplements. I personally believe that we can get 100% information delivered through the skin. So that's been my principle that we've been working on for really almost a quarter of a century.
So let's wind back a little bit. So you mentioned the term entrainment. So that's not entertainment. You didn't say entertainment, you said entrainment. Now, there's technologies on the market that have existed a long time that are based on binaural beats that supposedly do brain entrainment. And maybe if you can describe a little bit what do you mean by this kind of body-based entrainment? How is light and sound connected to it? You mentioned using headphones and all that. I assume your technology is not just listening to music and entertainment, but it's something deeper. You mentioned sacred geometry. Why are these things connected and why is it important?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think another term that you can use for entrainment and not entertainment, it's actually funny. We actually talk about if you break down the etymology, enter is inside, entrainment. So we think about the movies, when you're watching movies, it's entertainment. They're entraining our brains as we're watching this story to take us into whatever is happening. And think about even watching horror movies. We're entraining our bodies into that as well, creating that same biochemistry. So that's why I personally don't choose to watch those kinds of films. But we can apply that same principle because another term of entrainment, in my opinion, is hypnosis, is being able to bring our bodies into a collective unison of understanding around a specific topic of change or something that we're wanting to create in our bodies. That's really what's happening with hypnosis. Now, what I find to be fascinating about biochemistry is we're creating patterns since really the moment that we're born, and they form really easy just by observing our parents or our environment that we live in, or seeing our friends. Next thing you know, we're smoking, or next thing you know, we're drinking, or next thing you know, who knows what we're doing. And you're like, oh, it's just a habit. It's been something I've been doing forever. Well, if you can form a negative habit that quickly, why can't we form a positive habit just as easily? We just need to put in a different stimulus with information. So we're talking about sound, light, frequency, and vibration. That's what you talked about. The reason why I'm using sound is when we look at the electromagnetic field spectrum, really at the slowest level, we're looking at radio waves. And as we begin to move along the electromagnetic field spectrum, we get into visible and invisible light. And then we move into what I'd be like pulsed electromagnetic fields, getting into microwaves and things like that are way quicker, even cell phone radiation. So everybody has talked to me. They're like, oh, are you talking about megahertz? Everybody said that to me. Dr. Schwartz, you're working with ultrasound. And I'm like, no, I'm actually working with, I just made this word up, hyposound. I'm going for something 100 hertz and lower. And the reason why I'm specifically wanting to work with that range, because when I'm looking, and just think about some of the fundamental frequencies that we know in the body, the Schumann frequency is 8 hertz. And now some people say that that's gone up to 25 hertz and 48 hertz. Still, it's under 100 hertz. Think about the phi ratio, 1.68 hertz, under 2 hertz. We're looking at all the brainwave states. Even if we're looking at gamma that goes up to 60 hertz, it's still under 100 hertz. When we're studying vibroacoustic research, which actually all comes out of Norway and Finland and all those Scandinavian countries, Olaf Skili and things back in the 90s, all those early frequencies were being researched were all under 100 hertz. And these are things for pain reduction and autism and muscle regeneration, all kinds of things like that. So what I see is there's a deep connection. And also when we're looking at the auditory sound spectrum, audible sound is between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. And when we're looking at the receptors of our skin through perception of sound, we can perceive sound. The research shows between 0.5 hertz and 100 hertz of the skin. I believe it can go lower than that, but that's kind of the delta brainwave state range. So now there's an interesting interplay between 20 hertz and 100 hertz where we can hear and feel. Also, to take it to another level, I think it's important to discuss the bridge between quantum physics, which is the study of potentiality and different dimensional realities and basically quantum energetics of energy, versus Newtonian physics, which is what operates on velocity and acceleration and mass and really governs this three-dimensional spacesuit for which we operate, this three-dimensional plane that we exist. But there has to be a bridge between this quantum energy, potentiality, infinite dimensional space, and where it grounds into the three-dimensional Newtonian world. And really the difference between sound and light is speed. So if we take light and we begin to slow it down, now why I like working with light, and I'm a laser expert. I've been working with infrared lasers in the 808 range, 810 range for many, many years clinically, as well as, red, infrared, and different color LED diodes for red light therapy, like obviously that we're familiar with. That works deep penetration into like the DNA of the cells. But I want to actually kind of back it up where we can have a direct communication with the living connective tissue matrix. And I want to talk directly to the receptors of the cell membrane that initiates biochemistry. So I think if you look in all the pictures of all these crazy reactions and arrows and abbreviations of numbers and letters, people look at it to get their mind blown, like, what does this mean? But if you ever asked yourself the question, where does biochemistry come from? Like, we're not born with a biochemistry box in our liver. Well, we are, technically. I guess we really are. But really, it's a dynamic system of ever-changing biochemistry that's influenced through our environment. Bruce Lipton talks about this, about epigenetics, and how you can put information into a receptor site, and based off of that information, whether it's toxic or negative, versus if it's life enhancing or positive, it will create a different biochemical cascade for creating a different physiological effect. One can take you into anxiety and sympathetic nervous system. Others will pull you into parasympathetic nervous system. And once again, easily monitored through heart rate variability, which is part of the testing that we do. So really, as we're formulating these sonic pharmaceuticals, I'm wanting to use sound. And I'd love to show you a picture of my biohacking space I have just upstairs. I did an hour session in the chamber, quantum vibe chamber is what I call it. It's an eye pyramid, from Jason Stiles' eye pyramids, plugged into my vibe system. Plus I have a 7-color facial light system. Plus I have red and infrared pulsed red light. And then what I did is I asked myself the question, what's my intention for the day? And I knew I was coming on your podcast. Well, I actually listened to 2 tracks, 2 20-minute tracks. One's called Transformation, and it's a sonic vision board. And I set an intention on how I want to have this experience today, and how I want to feel, and how I want to have this experience with Timu, who I've never really had a good conversation with till right now. And then the other one is called Who Am I? And it's a journey of self-actualization. And I just really spend in a field of harmonic resonance. I'm setting my intention and bringing my body and cells into a harmonic resonance with my intentions. And in that space, we create transformation. And really, this is how the effects of using sound, light, frequency, and vibration collectively can all be used harmonically into this human organism to optimize biochemistry.
I love the term sonic ceutical. That's amazing. And
Thank you.
yeah, we are kind of like bioelectric beings, biochemical beings, and the combination of these two is fascinating. I speak about frequency. Now, if we look at the effects of different frequencies on the cell, the extremely low frequency sounds like 3 to 30 hertz, those do affect the ion channels in the cell membranes, and that can alter the transportation of ions such as calcium, which is crucial for cell functioning, across the cell membrane. Now, these frequencies are used in certain technologies like transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is a medical device for treating depression, for example. And then if we move higher, we go to low frequency, 30 to 300 hertz. That's when we are affecting the permeability of the cell membrane itself by influencing the voltage gates on those channels. That's super interesting because that affects the nutrient uptake and waste elimination of the cells. And there are technologies that stimulate bone growth, for example, that affect specifically these areas, and also some technologies that treat pain. Now, if we go higher, we go to 300 to 10,000 kilohertz, from 300 hertz to 10,000 kilohertz. These are affecting the cellular metabolism and movement of the ions across the cell membranes, and they really do modulate the cellular activity, such as synthesis of proteins and functions of enzymes. And when you have an electrical muscle stimulator, that's when you are using those kind of frequencies, and that is a form of a therapeutic ultrasound. Now, I just want to give this context so that people can kind of like visualize what's happening on a cellular level. So the higher you go, like the more noticeable the effect is, right? And the more deeper we go, the more deep down, almost subconscious on the cellular level, like going down to the electric communication, which really happens through chemistry and through ions. So it's a fascinating topic, sonic ceuticals. And you're also combining that with light. Is there like some kind of resonance that you're looking by combining these both?
That's a great question. So if I really wanted to give you the vision, okay, because I'm going for something, just a little background about myself. I'm a chiropractor by license, but since 2000 to 2015, I was in clinical practice, specifically reversing chronic degenerative conditions and allergies and autoimmune diseases, exclusively with subtle energy vibrational techniques and technologies. I actually was working with radionics technologies for a while. I started developing biofeedback systems for a while. So I'm actually a biofeedback expert as well, working with lasers. So these were things clinically I was working with, really reversing, and I used very little supplements. The only thing that I was using was probiotics, lymphatic drainage, and minerals and structured water. These were like the foundations, and everything else I was really working with reprogramming the nervous system, because I really asked myself, what's the language of human physiology? And it's that of vibrational resonance. And so being able to work in that space, and I've seen, thousands of cases with conditions that are not supposed to get better using little like energy vials and biofeedback systems and lasers, and like things like that. So there's been this journey of working. At first, I was working with lasers, and once again, for tissue regeneration and pain, a couple of minutes. I mean, you kidding me? It's a miracle. I have some great videos on my YouTube channel. There's a woman that had like 3-degree burns on her hands. Amazing. But then when we started getting into how do you reprogram the nervous system for quote unquote autoimmunity, when you look up the definition, when you Google it, it would say for some unknown reason, the immune system become hypersensitive and begin attacking itself. But really that unknown reason is a very known reason. It's actually due to pathogens, bacteria, viruses, parasites, things like that, toxins, even allergies, endogenous allergies. And there's a big topic that we don't have enough time to get into. But that process is what opens up the immune system to actually function, actually very normal. It's trying to handle it. So I used to say to myself, how do I get there? How do I get to that pathogen? And when I started studying pathogens, I talk about this extensively in my book, Primal Resonance. I have a whole chapter on eliminating infectious agents and allergies. When you look at the size of a bacteria or even a mycoplasma or a virus, and the bacteria are the biggest of the three, these are like 0.0057 like nanometers. I think everybody on this podcast can visualize that a cell is very small. If you took one cell and put it on a petri dish, that's tiny. It's hard to see. So a 0.0025 nanometer speck inside of that cell, it's a speck inside of a speck. If you really look at the physics, okay, now we're going back to physics. These are not operating in Newtonian physics. When you're inside of that cell, they talk about quantum physics is how they explain the galaxies and the universe. And then they talk about infinite smallness. This is the same physics that's governing inside of a cell. So now we're looking at that mycoplasma, that virus is more of an energetic disturbance than a physical thing. So if that's the case, then let's not use a physical thing to heal it. And even if you're using like Ayurvedic herbs, which we know are so effective, or even like acupuncture, which I'm a huge proponent of, that or homeopathy, it's really, the medicine is really energetic than physical. And it's creating an environment of homeostasis inside the cells that essentially takes away the power, and it either targets the immune system to improve, to do its job, and or it weakens the pathogen to where it changes, or actually there's another term that I love talking about, pleomorphism. Familiar with pleomorphism, Timu?
No, that's a new one. What is it?
So this is so fascinating. A normal healthy life cycle is basically a 3-stage life cycle. And when the environment is great, this goes back to degeneration versus regeneration. Your cells are regenerating, everything's happy, you got your gut flora, no dysbioses, the enzymes, chemistry, everything's working great. But when you alter that life cycle, and what alters it? The environment. That life cycle turns into a 16-stage, complex, degenerative life cycle. And so what we see are these, they say there's more germs in your bodies than there are cells.
Yeah, like 10 times more is the most common estimate, but like there is different estimates how many there is, but they're definitely more than your own cells.
Exactly. So through this process of pleomorphism, these happy, healthy, regenerative cells go into an altered pleomorphic 16-stage life cycle shift. And they literally, I always think of that movie Predator, like where we see something, it literally morphs into this cell wall deficient pathogen where something's going from a happy, healthy germ into something that can cause ongoing.
So it's like almost like a shape-shifting cell, because my understanding is, based on your description, is that it's the microorganism or cell's ability to change form. Now, I do remember that this is one of the ways how they detect potentially malignant cancer cells, is this capability, adaptive ability of cells and bacteria, organisms to change form, and they shape shift into something completely different.
Exactly. And so once you start kind of piecing this is at least in my mind, okay? When I started kind of piecing this all together, and remember, I said the question I asked me, a couple questions is, where does biochemistry originate? 2, what's the most effective delivery system for influencing biochemistry in the body? And then really, if I'm addressing what I know about chronic degenerative conditions, the number one core factor is chronic infection and toxicity. It's anchored by emotional trauma. So we don't have time on this podcast, but that'll be for another conversation. But ultimately, that mixture, and what's so interesting about trauma, okay, but there might be physical trauma, like an auto accident or something like that. Most of us are having emotional trauma. Our parents didn't love us, or something. We got a girl that we love broke up with us, or something. Who knows? Whatever that weird trauma happened at a young age, and it alters our belief system. It alters the epigenetic imprint into our body, and it literally begins to alter the way that our mitotic 7-stage process begins, where it all starts in the beginning. And so we're once again wanting to get and influence that initial receptor at that anaphase, phase 1 of mitosis. And it's all quantum. So then the other question I had to ask myself is, how do I clear cellular memory? Because cellular memory is ultimately what's feeding into this altered pleomorphic life cycle from chronic infection. Think about Lyme disease. That's a big topic. You got bit by a deer tick that relayed a spirochete in the body. But now we know that there's many co-infections that are really creating this ongoing process. And really the research from back in the 80s showed that as long as you have a strong host and a weak spirochete, probably nothing's going to happen. So now it comes down to, how do you maintain and optimize your host? We're the host. And how do we shift this pleomorphic timeline from this complex degenerative 16-phase cycle back? Because the arrows move in both directions. That's what's so amazing, Timu, is anything that is degenerative can become regenerative with the right set and settings. And that's where I think biohacking, this is what's so amazing about the biohacking industry and being able to, I'm going to make a slight alteration, if I may.
Sure. From
biohacking to bioharmonizing.
Bioharmonizing. I love that, because what in the end people seek is not to violently crack into systems and all that, but what they want to have is more resonance and harmony in their lives. And I'm on the same page with you. Like most of the biohacks that are maybe even, better, faster, stronger, living forever, kind of like over the board, like those are not in resonance with life in general around you. It's like hacking or trying to get shortcuts. But in the end, where people are happiest in my mind are when they live in harmony and with resonance with all life. Now, you're also known as Dr. Vibe. You have this technology that supposedly stimulates these kind of experiences. And can you describe that shortly? And you can then share where people can learn more if they want to get your books and get their hands on this technology or try it out. What is it that enables them to take advantage of these discoveries in bioharmonic technologies?
Exactly. Thank you, Timu. Appreciate that. So they're called vibes, and it's an acronym. It stands for, Timu, repeat after me: vibrational, individualized, body, enhancement, system. It's a vibe system. It's a full body music activated vibrational sound technology designed with one real intention: is how do you clear cellular memory? How do you bring the body into parasympathetic? And then once you accomplish those two things, how can we begin to change biochemical cascades through specialized sonic-ceutical programs that I've been creating since 2007? And our website is Bioharmonic Technologies, and you can go visit us online. We're very active on our Instagram, so bioharmonic_technologies. You'll find us, my personal website, Dr. Vibe, Dr. Vibe, will get you to me. And also I have an Instagram for my book. It's read_primal resonance. So you can go to there, you can go to Amazon, Primal Resonance. You can put in my name, Dr. Steven Schwartz with a V, Steven, Schwartz, Schwartz. And we also have a really active YouTube channel. I invite you, Timu, actually, I'd invite you to go check out some of my vintage Dr. Schwartz videos. And one thing I really wanted to connect with you more on, I know you have a lot of stories about like the indigenous studies and plant medicines and things. A lot of these discoveries that came for this work came out of early ayahuasca sessions I had in 2004 in Peru.
That's early.
Super early.
Yeah.
I know we're about to wrap up.
You were before me. Like I think for me it was 2007. So here we go. But that's also early, like super early, like considering it was not public information in the way it's nowadays. Like it was not trendy. There was no podcasters talking about it. There was no YouTube channels. Like there was nothing. It was a matter of early pioneering discovery. Of course, it has been going on for decades.
You know, what's interesting about that, Timu, is what brought me to Peru was from a workshop that I did in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 2004, where Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden, and this other wizard, Dr. Todd Okitis, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, He works with V-cells, stem cells. But I met them in 2004, and I learned about the didgeridoo and all these other sacred indigenous instruments. And it really shifted something inside of me, said that I needed to learn to play the didgeridoo. And next thing you know, I found just a few weeks later, a Peruvian shaman came to my town in Denver, Colorado that played the didgeridoo, activated my nervous system, and invited me to come with him on this shamanic journey to Peru. You'll love this. I never even heard of ayahuasca. And next thing you know, we did the diet leading into it, but not knowing what it was all about. And next thing you know, I find myself in the deepest, darkest jungles, experiencing this very powerful, transformational medicine that changed my life forever. And it's been a crazy journey ever since. But you know what? In that moment, I said, would my mother come and sit in the jungle and vomit for like all night long? And so from that, this technology, I call it shamanic technology. It's like, how can we bring the same principles that are so cleansing to connect at that deepest soul level and clear past generational traumas into something that's palatable for the masses? And really through that, that's been the journey. And my book talks about this in detail, Primal Resonance. And really, it's amazing. And I invite you, we're in Europe. Really thank you to allowing us to come to your, it opened up Europe for us, Teemu, coming to Amsterdam 2 years ago and then being there last year. So we have a couple, Slovenia, we have one. I think we have one actually in Finland. I have to find out. I know in Sweden we do. So they're getting speckled throughout Europe and around the world. Really, you're our access point to the world. And that was my intention when I signed on to aligning with you guys. And I just really want to thank you for allowing me to be a guest on your podcast. And I look forward to eventually finding my way out to Helsinki. For this year, we're going to be in Japan. I've never been there before, so another adventure awaits.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that story, going from the deepest jungles through didgeridoos to resonating with the cosmos, the shaman's drum, all the way to bioharmonic technologies. And fascinating to hear that background story, and also the fact that you were not primed in the wrong possible way to these journeys, but you kind of almost like accidentally tripped on it. And I feel like the divine is calling, people. It's not the other way around, that you go seeking it. It calls you in. And happy to hear that. And that you got, a new direction for your life in a sense of combination of all of these different aspects as a scientist and technologist, doctor, like discovering how these frequencies can be used to heal and restore the balance. So thank you very much. So I recommend people to check out bioharmonictechnologies.com and Dr. Vibe or Dr. Steven Schwartz. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast. I would love to hear more of your stories and hope maybe we do that soon enough. And can't wait to see you again, maybe in Tokyo, 11th and 12th of October in Tokyo, Japan. So that's our first event and can't wait to see you there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sushi in Japan.
All right. Wonderful. So thank you so much and have a wonderful, resonating, harmonic day.